There's a lot you can learn from Out of the Past.
Welcome to Martin County Historical Society's Out of the Past. I'm Lenny, this is Jim, and today we're going to see a really interesting interview with Marilyn Kerrigan and the Truman Historical Society. But before we do that, what'd you bring, Jim?
Well, today I've got a few items here. The first is this picture. It is the 5th grade of William Budd School in 1964, I believe. And while the picture is very awesome, the story that goes with it is also interesting.
Yeah, well, tell us about that.
A gentleman from Adrian, Minnesota went thrift shopping and bought a record. And in the record, when he went to take the disc out, was this picture from Fairmont, Minnesota. So he looked us up and sent it to us in the mail, and we are very thankful for that people think of us that way. So
Yeah, well, great. Yeah, that's an interesting picture.
Yeah, very
nice.
good.
And what do you have here?
Well, these are really cool looking. This is a 1937 trophy from Interlaken Golf Course. This is for a ladies tournament, consolation winner. And then we've got this one here. Is a 1941 Interlaken Golf Club trophy. And this is a pretty recent gift to us. And this is part of a very nice display we now have on Interlaken Golf Club.
Yeah, we actually have the display case that was at the entry of Interlaken Golf Club.
Yes.
It's been donated to the Martin County Historical Society, and it's a beautiful display with many trophies and a lot of remembrances included.
Oh yes, this is just a very, very small fraction of what we've got there today. Lenny, I believe you've done an interview recently that we should take a look at?
Yes, Marilyn Kerrigan with the Truman Historical Society. Really
yes.
interesting, a lot of information that's in some ways new to us, but very helpful.
Sure.
So let's take a look at it.
Very good.
We're at the Research Library here in the Pioneer Museum, and today I'm going to visit with Marilyn Kerrigan. She's from Truman. She knows a lot about the history of Truman. She's involved with the Truman Museum. And to start out with, tell us a little bit about the Truman Museum and what your connection is there.
Okay, I taught in Truman for 34 years, and after I retired, I started volunteering at the museum, and I have been there ever since. And we have a building that was donated by Morgan and Jan Tennyson back in 1999 when we became 100 years old. So we have been in that building since, and that's I'm on the board, and that's how I got involved.
Okay. And I'll mention, too, you're on our board for about 6 years, so
Yes,
appreciate
I
your
was.
work here, and you've continued on into Truman. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Truman. When did it get started? You said something about 100 years. How long has it been in existence? When did it get started? What were some of the things that took place in the early days?
Well, it was the railroad, of course. They had the East-West Railroad in Fairmont, and then they wanted a North-South Railroad. So they built from Fairmont to Madelia, and the towns of Northrop and Truman and Louisville developed around that. There was a town, Nashville Center, that was prominent at that time, and they were hoping that the railroad would go through, and it did not. So
That's one of the lost towns?
yes, it's one of your lost towns, and there's a nice historical marker there that tells all about it. A lot of buildings in Truman, a couple schools and houses have come from Nashville Center.
Oh, really?
And then the town, of course, just slowly kind of faded away, and due to the railroad. Truman got its name from the vice president of the railroad, J.T. Clark. He was he named it after his son, Truman.
Oh.
And a lot of people involved with railroads, like surveyors and the people that plat out the towns, like to name things for themselves. Or
Do you think a lot of people might think that it was named for Harry Truman, the president back in the day?
They very well could. Of course, I don't believe Truman was very old at that time, if he was born.
Well, that's true.
But I know when we celebrated our I wasn't around, but when they celebrated the 50th in 1949, they invited Harry Truman to
Really?
come, and he wrote him a nice letter declining that he wasn't able to. And
Do you have that letter in the museum then?
yes,
Oh, great.
and they made some coins too, I think, and put his face on it, which was kind of misleading, but but anyway, they used that to promote the town. The other things in the town, Oric, Whitehead was a surveyor, and he named our main street, which is Cyril. It's his name spelled backwards.
Oh, really?
And if you go to Louisville, you will find an Oric Street. So he liked to leave his mark when
interesting.
he was on the railroad.
So, who are some of the significant people that might have influenced the development of Truman that you can think of? Besides this, Oric Whitehead apparently was one.
Yes. Some of the early businessmen were, one in particular was William Hinton. He was from Nashville Center. He had a store there, and he was a clerk of the town. He moved his store to Truman, and later on he got involved in politics. He was county commissioner. He was in the House for 3 years. He was elected to the Minnesota House, and then he was elected to the Senate for 2 more years, and also started the People's State Bank of Truman.
Yeah, so I think back there was a Hinton Motors too. Is that
Yes.
part of what he
It was,
was involved
it would
with
be
as well?
Relation, yeah,
Relation,
that had the cars.
Okay. Speaking of businesses, what are some of the more prominent businesses that developed through the history of Truman that you can think of?
The Farmer's Elevator, Truman Farmer's Elevator, was almost 100 years old before it was sold to Wanwan Farm Service. So that was a big employer in the town at that all throughout our history, and also Olson Furniture
Sure, I
Company.
remember them. Yeah.
E.E. Olson married a gal whose father owned the furniture company and funeral parlor in town, and he took that over. And he was, I didn't know him personally, but he always would say he was the first graduate of Truman High School.
Oh.
And and this was in 1913, and he said, I was at the top of my class, and I was at the bottom of my class. He was the only graduate that year. Yes. But that furniture store was very, very important for the area. People came from all around to get their furniture and carpeting and stuff.
We certainly bought some carpeting and furniture there over the years
really?
as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was quite a store.
Yeah,
It
they
really
had
was.
a wonderful reputation.
Yeah.
They sure did.
What are the changes, significant changes that you can think of that you know of throughout the history of Truman that's either affected it positively or negatively?
I guess, the railroad, of course, was
Sure.
the stimulus, and it boomed like all the other little towns along the railroad line. And I think the farmers of the area and the elevator, all of that really, really added to the economy. The elevator, of course, was important for many years, employed a lot of people, and it also had a John Deere division, a lumber yard, and so it really, had a broad helpfulness to the people in the area.
And the things I've looked at in our museum that are about Truman, one thing I've come across is a picture of Twine Day. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. The farmers in the fall needed twine for their harvest, and they would order the twine from actually the prison in Stillwater. That had the best. They made the best quality twine.
They had plenty of time to do it.
Yes, exactly. And it would come on the train in the fall, and they sold tons of twine in the fall to the farmers, and that was a big deal. And people didn't come into town too often, and this was a big time for families to come and the kids come, and it was a special day, actually, kind of a celebration.
Big celebration.
Yes.
Okay, speaking of celebrations, were there any others that you can think of that are kind of significant like that?
Yes. In 1910 or 1909, excuse me, they celebrated their 10th anniversary, and also in 1949 was their 50th anniversary, and that was a huge celebration. We have a picture. We've blown it up for to put in on one of our buildings, and the streets were packed. This was taken off of the Ferris wheel, and looking down on the people that were visiting in the street, and they claim, the businessmen with their counts, that over the 3-day celebration that about 40,000 people came.
Boy.
So it was a big deal. And also, in 1974, we had our 75th anniversary, and that also was a very big celebration. The Truman JCs all were in charge of it, and they really planned a great day. So, and then of course in '99 was our 100th, and that was quite a big deal too. And lots of people and lots of activities for the visitors.
I know you put out a book too for the 100th anniversary,
Yep.
and we refer to that quite a bit. When people have questions about the history of Truman, you know,
Yes.
so that was very well done as well.
Yes, yes.
Any other significant historical events that influenced Truman in one way or the other?
One specific incident that I remember is 1982. The Truman Blue Jay football team went to the state tournament. It was the first prep bowl held in the state. It was in the brand new Metrodome. And they played against Adrian. And in the last few seconds of the game, a field goal was kicked by the coach's son, and they won the game. And that, so far, is the only state championship they can claim to have achieved. And that was really exciting.
So they won with a field goal, unlike the Vikings, who will lose with a field goal.
Exactly.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that is important. I'll bet
It is.
there was probably nobody left in Truman that day to
No.
man the stores. They were all at the game.
Yep, that is very true. They said the last person out, turn off the lights. And some other important things I think that happened. This was in early 1900. A man who was from Garden City became very, very influential and very rich, actually, by buying up a lot of land. He came from Garden City, and there's some interesting things about Garden City, small little town, and there's a book about it that there's 7 men that became multimillionaires just from that little town in Minnesota. Example, George Palmer from Hubbard Milling, Piper from Piper Jaffray, Henry Welcome, and Carlos Boynton was one of those millionaires. He had a real estate company and bought huge amounts of land in North Dakota. He bought 1.25 million acres of land from the railroad, and also in other states he had land of lumber and many investments. He was very successful. He had a ranch outside. They called it a ranch. It was 1,200 acres where he bred his harness horses. He loved his harness horses, And he also had a 1 mile track that he built on his farm. This is a recent, or not so recent, but 1950s picture of the Boynton Ranch. The huge barn was for his harness horses. And he would come very often from the Twin Cities area to visit his ranch and see how things were going. They also raised a lot of sheep as well. And one trainload of sheep came, it was a special train, they said. It had 2 decks, I guess, and 3,000 sheep came on that train. It was 10 railroad cars full of sheep.
Wow.
and they herded them out of town. I know there's a picture I have to find, but the sheep were in the street, and there was an early picture. And they herded them out to west of town to the ranch.
Okay, now you said, I thought you said the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
Did
Yes.
they actually race horses there then?
Yes.
Horse racing?
Yes, harness horses with the sulky. Those were the kind of races that they did. This is an aerial photo taken, and it's you can kind of see this is the acreage here, and this is the outline of the track. Farmers that farm the land later on said that they could just feel when the equipment went over the track, they could just really feel it because it was really built up a lot. And a lot of people came on Sundays and enjoyed the races.
Did they race like every Sunday or?
For a while, I believe that was a very entertaining thing back in the early 1900s.
Did they come from other areas of the state then? Bring their
He
horses?
did have horses come from other venues, and they would race. I know Dan Patch was here due to the older people that remember when they were kids, that their folks talked about seeing Dan Patch.
Dan Patch was a very famous
Yes.
horse.
Yes, he held the record for the mile. It happened at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. It was 1 minute and 55 seconds, and he held that record for 50 years.
Wow.
Yes, and so he was quite famous at that time. He was like a celebrity, like a sports celebrity. He was used for endorsements of all kinds of products.
boy.
He even had a song on a waltz, the Dan Patch Waltz, and he had his own railroad car, and
Wow.
I mean, it's quite a story.
Now, do you think there was betting on those horse races?
I don't know about that, but nothing
No
would
record of that,
surprise
though,
me. No, no record. There supposedly was a sign in the barn that said Dan Patch, because that was where he stayed when he came to visit the ranch. There was a fellow in Truman that had registered purebred harness horse, and he went around the track with Dan Patch. He said he raced against Dan Patch, but Dan Patch in the later years did not race because nobody could race against him. No horse could beat him, and he kept breaking his own records before he came up to the minute 55 that stood so long. So that I tried to make a connection between him and Dan Patch's owner. I know they were both very rich men. They lived in St. Paul, and I bet I can't find it in black and white or.
When you say harness racing, for anyone that maybe doesn't know, and I'm not a real expert on that at all, that's when there's something behind the horse that the horse pulls, and the person, the jockey, so to speak, would be riding on that. Then. Is that correct?
It's a 2-wheel sulky, and I think there's a racetrack up near the cities. It's called the Aces, I believe, and I don't know how popular that is, but I know that was not recently opened.
Sure. Well, a lot of good information. What else can you tell us? Some other things that I haven't asked and that you have access to that you can tell us or show us? I see you got some books and pictures
yes,
here.
Well, a few more things about Carlos Boynton.
Okay, sure.
Because he was a significant person. He built a home in Mankato, and that house has been refinished and redecorated to what it was back in the day, and it's a beautiful home on Pleasant Avenue in Mankato. He married a gal from Adelia, and they built a mansion on Summit Avenue, and it was designed by Clarence Johnson, who was the Minnesota State architect for like 30 years. And Johnston designed a lot of state buildings. A lot of University of Minnesota buildings were designed by him. And this mansion of Carlos Boynton is on the cover of a book that was published on the mansions of Summit Avenue. And they do take tours of the homes and take walking tours throughout the summers in that regard. Carlos Boynton died in 1919, and he had a son, Clifford, and Clifford was not the businessman like his father was. He enjoyed spending the money more than making the money, unfortunately. So his real estate business was sold, and it kind of got gobbled up by other real estate businesses. So that was kind of a short time of success that Carlos had, but Truman was very fortunate to be kind of a part of it in its history.
Any idea why he chose Truman or that area?
I really don't know. I know the good farmland around here. Supposedly he had a farm in North Dakota, but I could not find any information on it. I wrote the historical societies and so forth, and they really didn't have anything. So this I know because of the harness horses was his pride and joy.
Okay, good.
We have a historic marker there so that people will know the story.
Good. And you had some pictures and some things other than what we talked about, maybe?
Yes.
So.
Truman has a spruce up committee, and for about 6 or 7 years they've been painting the town and trying to fix it, beautify it, and fix it up. And there was a town in South Dakota that our spruce up committee noticed had these huge 8 foot by 4 foot historic photos of their town displayed. So they researched that, and they found a printing place in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that does that sort of thing. So 2 years ago, they looked through the museum photos and picked out some photos, 10 of them to be exact, that depict Truman back in the day.
Oh.
And so we have those displayed throughout the town. We also are planning on doing 5 more before the 125th.
So displayed on buildings throughout the town?
Yes, on buildings, yes. I do have a book that and I know you're not going to be able to see it on the camera very well, but a book that does have pictures of all of them, and then I just wrote a little story about each picture. So, but they are and this 50th anniversary one, of course, that one we blew up too. So that was a project that we did, and we want to add more to it.
God, sounds good. Anything else that you would like to add? We've covered quite a bit, and Truman history is interesting. And
yes. I can't think of anything more that I haven't mentioned. We've had a lot of political people, a couple of them from Minnesota. Yeah. David Jennings, who just passed away this past year, unfortunately. He was very influential in state government. He was elected in 1978 to the state legislature, became Speaker of the House in 1985, and he did try a little bid for the governor. He was later chosen as Commerce Secretary under Governor Jesse Ventura, and he also was chosen for some other high-end jobs, CEO of Schwann's Corporation in Marshall. Also, the Chamber of Commerce, Minneapolis Area Chamber of Commerce, too, he was in charge of. So he had quite a career, and
Sure.
being a Truman grad, everybody's proud of that, of course.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and Tom Hagedorn, too, our U.S. representative back in the 70s, was a Nashville Township farmer, and he served in Washington for quite a few years. And then his son, not too long ago, also served in his district.
Okay. Well, very interesting. Truman, like all communities, has evolved
Yes,
and changed, and still hanging on and
Yeah.
making itself vital. There's quite a few businesses in Truman that are significant to the county, still. So,
yeah.
well, thank you, Marilyn.
Yes.
Appreciate it,
Yes.
and glad to learn more about the history
Oh,
of Truman.
I'm glad to have been here. Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you.
Well, that sure was a great interview with Marilyn, Lenny. That was a lot of good information about Truman.
That was. Marilyn does a great job up there at the Truman Historical Society, and the information she gave us about Truman, the Truman area, and her museum. When you get a chance, I shouldn't say her museum, Truman's museum. When you get a chance, stop in there. It's a great little museum.
Yeah, that would be great. And we wanted to thank everybody again for watching. Please tune in to our next episode of Martin County Historical Society's Out of the Past.
There's a lot you can learn from Out of the Past.